like most, if not all of you, I'm passionate about creating impactful things. Inspired by the big ideas, larger than life ideas, but starting somewhere small, like pitching a tent and stargazing. And this journey started when I was small, inspired by, I suppose, having a few hobbies and strange habits as a kid. And I thought I'd paint the picture of one of those memories for you. Do you remember these camcorders? The big clunky things that held the VHS tapes? And some of my favorite features were the playback mode where you could record things and review it and look back on the footage. And it was always big and heavy, but I always propped it up on my shoulder and kind of awkwardly made the effort to record things. One of my favorite things to do was create commercials, or adverts as they call them here. There was something about setting the scene and directing the actors, in most cases my poor sister, and selling something that people could subscribe to that was really compelling for me. And on one such occasion, we decided we were going to sell this stuff, Silly Putty. For those of you that aren't aware of what Silly Putty is, it's a bit like a Play-Doh. And there my sister was. We clicked play on the cassette tape of REM. She was swaying back and forth in her flannel shirt and jeans and Converse shoes, talking about this thing that she could stretch and mold and form into a little ball, and all the while fit into this handy little container and made no mess. And as she convinced us all to buy this product, that was a wrap. But you ever had those experiences where what you envisaged or imagined didn't quite meet reality? Tinny music in the background and a lopsided video. Needless to say, I never did become a cameraman or a producer. But that fascination with building an experience that was compelling is something that I built my career on. And I think so beautifully describes what it means to build software product and create software product. Starting with a big idea or being inspired by a big idea, but starting somewhere. And when I was thinking about actually the way in which I do build impactful product and the important things to building impactful product comes down to three things. And the first is it worthwhile? In a world where there's lots of different things that we could be doing, how do we gauge what's worthwhile? How do we make those judgment calls? Second is it innovative? And I don't mean the big, all singing, all dancing innovative. What I do mean is about thinking about things a little bit differently. And the third is it nuanced? Some of my biggest learnings in product have come from the tiniest changes that I've made on that product. Or win. It's always easy to remember acronyms, and particularly winning ones. So when I think about what's worthwhile, I'm asking two questions. These two questions are very important. The first is, how much will I learn? And the second is, what's the risk? And you could think about that in terms of risk and reward, right? And that reward is in the learning. And it's really important to call that out because customers say one thing and they do another. The e-commerce business is moving at such a pace that it's nearly impossible to keep up with it. And so if you're not learning about your product or you don't understand the changes that you're making on your product, you're actually, in my world, nowhere, right? Because when you have successes, they're blind successes. When you have failures, they're blind failures. So bridging that gap between understanding and really actually thinking about what it means to learn about product is extremely important. So I work for a company called Cartrawler, and Cartrawler does what it says in the tin. We trawl the internet for cars. And the world of worthwhileness or gauging what's worthwhile is actually somewhat complex because we have two different types of customers. So we have the guys that work with us at Ryanair. So we are partnered with Ryanair. And so we work with the guys that power the site behind Ryanair. But then we also have to optimize our software for the end users that are using that software. And so thinking about what's worthwhile in that context is actually quite complex. And I'll explain it a different way. So we have all these car rental companies or car hire companies, and we're in the middle. So we're crafting the software and the interface in the middle. And over on the right there, you have our airline partners that work with us, so Norwegian, Emirates, and Ryanair again. And one such day, then we had to make a decision about what was worthwhile and how we'd go about something that was worthwhile. was actually with our partner Ryanair. They approached us about being a part of their native app. And at the time, or actually in travel, one of the things that's happened in the mobile space is actually that it hasn't taken off in the same way that it has in lots of other different industries. So mobile was very much underway. At the time we were approached about this decision, it was less than 10% of our traffic. So the idea that we had this robust offering and native app was definitely not something that we'd played into in a comprehensive way. So we definitely had experimented, we thought about things, but when the world's second largest airline approaches you about building into their native app, you're kind of going, gosh, that's kind of a ballsy move, right? And when we thought about going native or not native, and I thought I'd pull out this slide actually, because going native by the Urban Dictionary actually means, thinking about the cultural traits of those around you. And that's the complex, I suppose, learnings that we were going after when we decided to think about this native context. And that is that we were building a solution that was going to go into another solution. And how we went about doing that, or how we went about learning about that, was an important part of this decision. And so, as we considered this decision to be part of Ryanair's app, we were asking two things. The first was propensity to learn, right? So how much will I learn? And the second was around that riskiness. So if you look at the low riskiness and sort of high riskiness scale, and then the lower end of propensity to learn, so you're not learning a lot, you're asking yourself two questions. Do I get there? What's the point, right? If there's a lot of risk involved and you're actually not going to learn anything, and learning is the true reward in software, then why would we go after these opportunities? Whereas if you look at the upper two quadrants there, with high propensity to learn, or that capacity to learn lots more about what it was that you were actually going after, that's where the real winnings come from, right? And in the one quadrant where it's sort of lower risk, it's a solid move, right? Like low risk and you're going to learn a lot. That's a great idea. On the other side, it's a bit more ballsy, right? In that you're going to have to go after this thing, but you actually might learn a lot more quickly because you're going to get there more quickly. And our decision was right about here. So it was right in the middle. And when we thought about this, the way to kind of gauge risk, or actually think about how we were going to do this cleverly, was to start small, to start iteratively. So we didn't, have this perfect architecture or this perfect scalable model. And as I said before, we had kind of experimented in this space and we largely knew what it needed to look like. But we decided that actually we're going to learn as we go. And we will build things because we do have these capabilities. But the extent to which those are robust, question mark. And so we started in phases and we built out these phases. And we eventually went live with our first ever SDK into the second largest airline in the world. And it was a really exciting move. And you know what's happened ever since? We've grown 50% year on year in our mobile traffic. And that mobile upward trajectory has grown even more and more over time. And that is such an exciting journey to be a part of, not only because obviously we're getting to see all the different nuances and what's happening in the mobile space and travel, but also because we're part of that upward curve. So I'd encourage you to think about this, that sometimes you might not have, and I did receive pushback on this at the time, sort of perfectly architected solution. But what you do have is that ability to learn, and that learning is really, really important as you think about software product. So thinking of big and bold in innovation, I said earlier that innovation to me is actually less about this kind of amorphous term, which is it's all about big and bold and exciting and new and what does it actually mean. But to me, innovation is all about thinking a little bit differently. And two things. Firstly, knowing why, and secondly, knowing when. And why and when you're going to go after opportunities. I came across this shop in Copenhagen called Sneakers and Coffee. And I was like, that's pretty ingenious, right? And then and you might be asking yourself, well, is it ingenious? Like, what's that about? Like, why sneakers and coffee? I suppose, is it something practical and something delicious, or a wake up to the practical, or a wake up call to the practical? But actually, the geniusness or the innovation behind this shop is that they've cracked the nut that sparks the decision making behind why people would go into a shop with these two seemingly very different things. Because if you haven't noticed, coffee is something of culture now. There's a coffee culture, right? nice barista-made coffees, hand-roasted beans. It's an experience. It's much more about an expression and exclusive quality than it is about actually waking up in the morning. And then sneakers, well, they're a thing of high fashion. So if you've walked by the store windows of Brown Thomas in the high street there, like these things are actually in the window. So they're less about walking around comfortably or practically, but they're actually much more about looking and feeling good, right? Yeah, they're actually cool now. So when we think about this shop, the reason why it's innovative is because they knew why, which was you go into a shop like this to look and feel good, and they knew when, which is in an artsy district in Copenhagen where you go to look and feel good. And in my world, there's lots of things that pair well together and that kind of go well together. We work with airlines, we work with various different forms of transport, so that could be car rental, it could be trains, it could be, automobiles. Bring to mind this film, planes, trains, automobiles, like they sound like they go together, right? It rolls off the tongue. But actually, we kind of made this mistake at the start, and then we said these things naturally go together, therefore we're going to sell these things together. And when you pair it back to the user journey and how it is that someone is actually making a travel purchase, these things don't really go together as well, and I'll talk through that. So when you first go on your journey and you're thinking about going on your holiday and travel, the first thing you're thinking is, where am I going to go? What's this going to look like? And so, am I going to go to New York, or am I going to go to Montenegro, or am I going to go to, where am I going to go? And you're looking at blogs, you're looking at TripAdvisor and all those different sites to try and decide where you want to go. And once you've made that decision as to where you want to go, chances are you're going to book that flight. You're right, okay, so I'm going to hunker this down, I'm going to book the flight, and now I know how I'm going to get there, and I'm all good to go. And then the next decision that crosses people's minds is around, well, I need a place to stay. So I need to ensure I understand where I'm going. And all of those decisions happen pretty synchronously in that way across all of our different user journeys and customer paths. And the last thing that people are considering is actually their transportation. So if they're considering their entire holiday, and there's lots of complex journeys and unlimited journeys and things lots of things that they need to think about, they're probably considering something like car rental. But if they're thinking about sort of a point-to-point journey, or they're trying to get from home to the airport, or something very simple, then they're probably thinking about taxis or transfers, right? And so if we think about the why of why people would make those types of decisions, in the first instance with car rental, it's about the unlimited journeys, and it's about the complex and unlimited sort of nature of these things. The fact that continuously throughout your holiday you're going to be thinking about this. It's much more about self-service. Whereas on the other side, transfers and taxis are about simple, limited, point-to-point journeys, as opposed to sort of these more complex notions. And then when you think about when you make these decisions, on car rental, it's much more planful because you're thinking about your entire holiday, and you're thinking about all the different things that you're going to be doing during that holiday and all the different places you need to go. Whereas on the taxi side of things, it's pretty much on the fly. I mean, who of you have booked a taxi 3 months in advance? Like, it just doesn't happen, right? And so it's much more about actually when am I going to be making these journeys? And so we're experimenting with something along these lines actually at the moment, which I would say is more innovative than what we did at the start, which was pairing those two content types, right? And that is that we're thinking about, okay, right, we're going to ping you at the appropriate time when you're actually thinking about this thing, as opposed to trying to overwhelm you at the start with loads of different options and all different types of transport. So whether it be about sneakers and coffee or car rental and transfers, it's really important to understand the why and when of those decisions. And finally, it's all about the small things. So when we think about the nuances of our products, and I'm sure a lot of you have had this experience, it's often the tiniest things, and certainly in my experience, that I've learned the most about my products. And in the world of car rental, we're renting out a very high value asset, something that involves contracts, something that involves insurance, something that involves a heck of a lot of uncertainty for people. And so the extent to which our UI or even our product layers are scrutinized and people are asking questions around transparency and what do these things mean, and it's this overwhelming thing that you're sort of having to take on, is very apparent for us. And one of the things that we really focus on are these user pain points and trying to solve for those user pain points as we build our software. So we know that 53% of our users don't understand the differences between basic and premium insurance packages associated with their car rental. And intuitively, you're looking at this and you're going, right, well, basic is something that's basic, right? So it's something bare bones level. And premium is something that's a little bit more than that, right? So it's probably something more. But if I actually explain those things, there's two things. So basic actually means it's the insurance that's offered by the car rental company. And it covers you for everything bar 3,000 euros, which you're liable for should you damage the car. Whereas on the flip side, we have this premium insurance that we sell, which is going to cover you for that 3,000 euro liability that you have as a function of the car rental provider. But the kinker is this. You're still going to have to pay for that 3,000 euros should you damage the car, and you just have to reclaim it back from this third-party insurance provider. Clear as mud? Exactly, right? Like, it's not exactly this easy concept to kind of consume, particularly within a few seconds in a UI. So we are focused on these sort of tiny things. One of the first tests we decided to do was we looked at our insurance display and we said, right, how are we selling this product? How are we comparing these two things? And it was really important that we compared both of the insurance offers between basic and premium and thought about actually what's the right amount of information, what is that information, what does that content need to say, and how do we think about this insurance product? And you guessed it, there was a 5.9% increase in conversion on less is more. So they didn't allow me to put up 6 up there. It was indeed 5.9% increase in conversion, which was a massive impact for a business of our size, right? And this idea that actually, if we got down to the right amount of information for people to be able to make that judgment call, then people understood the differences between those basic and premium insurance offerings. And this next test plays off something called the nudge principle, which many of you have probably heard about in behavioral economics. It's that idea that you don't actually tell people that they're going to be fat if they go up the escalator, or that they're going to be skinny if they go up the stairs, but in fact you hint at it, and you give them that idea or that notion that maybe these things happen, and then people take those directions. So in a world where we can't explain everything down to the hilt, particularly on something as complex and complicated as insurance, it's really important that we kind of get these principles across in at a brief glance way. So if we go back to these two different types of insurances, and we think about basic and premium, basic is actually kind of, again, one of those catch-all terms. What does basic mean? What does basic include? I don't really understand that. And actually what it is it's kind of limited, right? Like, you're not covered for everything. You still have that 3,000 euro liability. And if you still have that liability, then, again, you're really not covered, so it's actually limited. Whereas if we think about the other offer, one of the things we didn't understand is how do people understand insurance, or how do people understand cover? Do they expect this as a standard? Like, is it something that people, when they sign up to purchase car rental, they expect to be covered? Or is it something they expect to pay a premium for? And so we tried those very few words. So we actually looked at our 2 mobile devices there, and we tried these 2 tests. The first one we put out there was, okay, so we're going to call it limited cover, because that's what it is. It's limited in terms of what you're covered for. And then we're going to call the other thing standard. Let's see what happens. We got a -6% drop in conversion, which again, is just massive for a business of our size, right? Like, it's just huge. You're going, oh my gosh, like, people really don't want standard cover. They actually want something a bit more. And when we tried the limited and premium cover, we saw an 11% increase in conversion. And I think the point here is like, wow, that's really interesting. Like, people want to pay a premium for their insurance, and that's the learning out of this. But at the same time, you're going, that's massive for a couple changes and in a few words a copy, right? Like, that's amazing. That's really cool. And so we think about these users and solving some of those user problems. I'll share one more story with you. And we know that our customers travel with companions. So, the idea that you might be sharing some of the things that you're coming across on your site, or thinking about actually how do I make these purchasing decisions, is very relevant in our travel industry. And so we were seeing different behaviors in this space around sharing and sort of saving content. And we had this old display up here that you might be able to see. And at the bottom of it, we had something called the email quote. And it was a CTA that enabled people to email themselves a quote of what they had found on the site, right? Because if you're not necessarily the decision maker or purchaser, you want to be able to maybe send this to someone, you want to be able to save it and kind of come back to it. And we said, okay, fantastic. So we know that this is behavior that we're looking to drive because we know it's a problem that our users are facing, so we want to actually get underneath that. And we decided what we were going to do is we were going to actually enable them not to just email themselves a quote, but actually share this information because that's what they were trying to do, right? So we're like, okay, so we'll put the top prominently, we'll put that sort of share node at the top of the page, and we'll enable our users to be able to share this content so that they can share it with the people that are actually making decisions, or they can consult with the people they're going on travel with. What we saw was a drop off the cliff. No one clicked on that thing. Like, I don't know how that happened, and you're kind of going, well, this is a little bit of a mind, like I'm scratching my head, I'm going, how did this happen? And it's actually quite interesting. So, turns out that little node icon isn't well recognized in the space in the same way that like a little hamburger icon is recognized. So, every single time you see that in a UI, it's actually paired with the word share so that people know what this thing represents. So when they saw this, they didn't know what to do with it. But furthermore, and this is a little bit more interesting, right? The behavior in travel is that you save something before you share it. So we made a leap way too far, right? So we actually got them to try and share something when in fact what they wanted to do was save it before they shared it. If you look on the Airbnbs, Booking.coms, and all those sites, they have this little heart everywhere. And that has to do with saving before you share. So there's loads of different learnings, and I suppose the really big point around this is that sometimes it's in the smallest things that you drive the biggest changes. So I started on this journey talking about silly putty, and that big idea that I could create and build impactful things. And I'm wearing these Converse shoes today in remembrance of my small beginnings to build impactful things. 47 euro as opposed to 500 that I was thinking about blowing on a pair of Christian Louboutins to give myself an added element of confidence on this stage. Innovativeness, a bit of sparkle on an old classic. Nuanced, the same shoes that my sister wore when I started on this journey to kind of build and craft impactful things. So be inspired by the big things that fuel those ideas, but start somewhere and start small to ensure you get there and win. Thank you.